She filed a stalking lawsuit claiming I followed her for months across 3 cities. The problem: I was bedridden in a hospital room with 8 titanium screws holding my spine together the entire time. My ex-wife wanted to destroy my reputation and take my pension, but she forgot one thing. I am a structural engineer. I know how to find the cracks in a story and bring the whole thing crashing down. Before I tell you how I fought a legal war from a hospital bed, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support helps me share the truth. The first thing I felt was not the relief of survival. It was fire. A white-hot rod of agony fused directly into my lumbar spine. It felt like someone had replaced my backbone with a jagged piece of rebar and set it alight. I tried to shift my weight, but my legs were heavy. Dead weight. Useless. That was expected. The doctors at Mount Sinai had told me the recovery from a level 3 spinal fusion would be brutal. They had to fuse 3 vertebrae together just to stop the nerve damage that was slowly paralyzing me. I was 70 years old. My body was an old bridge that had carried too much load for too many years, and finally the structural integrity had given way. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to breathe through the pain. The heart monitor beeped a steady rhythmic cadence next to my ear. I was alive. I was in the recovery room. I was safe. Or so I thought. The door to room 402 didn't open softly. It banged against the rubber stopper with a violence that made me flinch. A jolt of pain shot up my neck. I expected a nurse, maybe a doctor coming to check my vitals. Instead, a man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit marched in. He smelled like stale coffee and rain. He didn't look at the monitors. He didn't look at the IV lines snaking into my arms. He looked at the clipboard in his hand and then at me with bored, indifferent eyes. Harrison Thorne. He didn't ask it as a question. He stated it as a fact. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry from the anesthesia tube. I could only croak a weak sound. Before I could get a word out, he tossed a thick manila envelope onto my chest. It landed right on the fresh incision site. The pain was blinding. I gasped, my back arching off the mattress involuntarily, which only made it worse. It felt like he had dropped a brick on a fresh burn. "You are served. Restraining order. Court date is next month. Don't miss it, or they issue a bench warrant. Have a nice day." He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving me gasping for air. A nurse rushed in a second later, her face flushed with anger. She must have seen him leave. She grabbed the envelope off my chest and checked my vitals, her hands gentle and shaking with rage. "Who was that?" she asked, checking my IV drip. "Did he hurt you? I should call security." I shook my head slowly, trying to focus my vision. My glasses were on the side table. I pointed to them with a trembling hand. She slid them onto my face. I needed to see what was in that envelope. I needed to know why a process server had just assaulted a man who couldn't even sit up. I opened the flap. The papers were thick, legal jargon. My eyes scanned the bold text at the top. State of New York, Family Court, Plaintiff Sylvia Thorne, Defendant Harrison Thorne, Sylvia, my ex-wife. We had been divorced for 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years since she left me for a younger lifestyle, and I focused on my work until my back gave out. Why now? I read the allegations, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a restraining order based on stalking in the 2nd degree. The affidavit claimed that on October 15th, Harrison Thorne was seen standing outside her apartment complex in Albany, watching her window in the rain. It claimed that on October 20th, I followed her to a shopping mall in Buffalo and harassed her in the parking lot. I laughed. It was a dry, painful wheeze, but I laughed. "Nurse," I whispered, "what is today's date?" "It is October 25th, honey," she said, adjusting my blanket. I looked back at the papers. October 15th, 10 days ago. On October 15th, I was not in Albany. I was right here in this city. I was in the emergency imaging center getting an MRI because I had lost all feeling in my left foot. I couldn't walk. I couldn't drive. I could barely stand up to pee without falling over. How could I drive 3 hours to Albany and stand in the rain when my own spinal column was collapsing on itself? "This is insane," I muttered. "This is physically impossible." I looked further down the document. She was demanding $5 million in damages for emotional distress and threatening to invoke the morality clause of our divorce settlement. That was it. That was the hook. If I was convicted of a crime, she got my pension, my entire 401k, 40 years of sweating on construction sites, 40 years of designing bridges and calculating load bearings. She wanted it all. "I need my phone," I told the nurse. "I need to call my lawyer." But before she could hand me my phone, the door opened again. My heart leaped. It was Lucas, my son. He was the one person I wanted to see. Lucas was 30 years old, but he still had that boyish look about him. Soft features, indecisive eyes. He was nothing like me. I was concrete and steel. He was watercolor and clay. But he was my son, and I loved him. I had called him the night before surgery. I told him I was scared. He said he would be there when I woke up. "Lucas." I breathed out relief washing over me. "You came." He stood in the doorway holding a paper bag from the hospital gift shop. Probably oranges, my favorite. I tried to smile to show him I was okay, despite the tubes and the wires. But Lucas didn't smile back. He walked to the foot of my bed. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at the envelope in my hands. The court papers. His face twisted. It was a look I had never seen directed at me before. Disgust. Pure, unadulterated revulsion. He lifted the bag of oranges. I thought he was going to put them on the table. Instead, he opened his hand and let the bag drop. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Oranges rolled out, scattering across the cold, sanitized tile. One rolled under the bed. Another stopped against the wheel of my IV stand. "Lucas," I said, confused. "What is wrong?" He stepped back as if my sickness was contagious, as if my broken body repulsed him. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and held it up like a shield. "The police called me Dad," he said, his voice shaking. Not with sadness, but with anger. "They told me everything. Mom told me everything." "Lucas, listen to me." I tried to raise my hand, but the pain slammed me back down. "I saw the photos, Dad." He cut me off, his voice rising. "I saw the pictures of you outside her house. I saw you in the truck. God, I defended you. For years I told Mom you were just strict, that you were just old-fashioned. But this..." He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he looked at me like I was a stranger. A monster. "You are sick." He spat the words out. "Mom is terrified of you. She is having panic attacks because you won't leave her alone." "Lucas, look at me." I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I cannot walk. I have 8 screws in my back. How could I stalk anyone?" He shook his head, refusing to listen to logic, refusing to see the man lying helpless in front of him. "Mom said you faked it. She said you hired someone to drive you, or you checked yourself out against medical advice. She has proof, Dad. She has photos of you." He turned toward the door, unable to even look at me anymore. "I brought you fruit," he said quietly to the doorframe, "because I thought my father was in pain. But you are not in pain. You are just evil." "Lucas, wait." He didn't wait. He walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the beeping monitor, the scattered oranges, and a lawsuit that said I was a criminal. I looked down at the papers again. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. I wasn't shaking from the pain in my back anymore. I was shaking from a cold realization. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Sylvia knew I was in surgery. She knew exactly where I was. That is why she timed it. She struck when I was under anesthesia, when I was weak, when I couldn't defend myself, and she had turned my own son into a weapon against me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The engineer in me woke up, the part of me that understood physics and reality. If she said I was there, then she had manufactured evidence. And if she manufactured evidence, she made a mistake. There is always a mistake in the design, always a hairline fracture in the concrete. I just had to find it. I reached for the call button. I didn't need a nurse for pain medication. I needed my glasses. I needed my phone. And I needed to see those photos Lucas was talking about. Because if there was a man in those photos who looked like me, then I wasn't just fighting a lawsuit. I was fighting a ghost. Lucas stood at the foot of my bed like a statue carved out of disappointment. I wanted to reach out and grab his hand. I wanted to pull him close and tell him that his father was still the same man who taught him how to ride a bike and how to solve quadratic equations. But the 8 titanium screws in my vertebrae anchored me to the mattress. My body was a prison, and my son was standing outside the bars, looking in with judgment. "Lucas, please," I said, my voice raspy. "Pull up a chair. You look tired." "I am not tired," he snapped. "I am exhausted. There is a difference. I have spent the last 3 nights listening to Mom cry on the bathroom floor because she thinks she saw your truck parked down the street. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To see their mother crumble into pieces?" I took a breath, trying to keep my heart rate down. The monitor beeped faster, betraying my calmness. "Lucas, look at me. Look at where I am. I have been in this hospital for 10 days. Before that, I was in a wheelchair at home for 3 weeks. How could I drive a truck to Albany? How could I stalk anyone when I cannot even walk to the bathroom without 2 nurses holding me up?" He didn't look at my legs. He looked at the wall. "She said you would say that," he muttered. "She told me you would play the victim. That is what you always do, right? You use logic and facts to make everyone else feel crazy. She warned me that you would use your surgery as an excuse." I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Sylvia. She had prepared him. She had written a script for this moment, and Lucas was reciting his lines perfectly. "She is manipulating you, son," I said softly. "She knows I am incapacitated. She is using your empathy against you. Don't you dare." Lucas stepped closer, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. She is the victim here. You are the one who controlled everything for 30 years. You decided where we lived. You decided how money was spent. You were always so cold, so distant. And now that she finally broke free, you cannot handle it. You want to drag her back down." I closed my eyes for a second. The accusation stung worse than the surgical incision. Cold, distant. That was Sylvia's narrative. The truth was, I worked 60 hours a week on construction sites, breathing in dust and exhaust, so they could live in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. I was tired, not cold. I was focused on providing, not distant. But Sylvia had rewritten our history. In her version, my silence wasn't exhaustion, it was hostility. My long hours weren't sacrifice, they were avoidance. I opened my eyes and looked directly at him. "I was never violent, Lucas. Never. I never raised a hand to your mother. I never raised a hand to you. Violence is not just hitting Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "There is emotional violence. There is the violence of making someone feel small, of watching them constantly. That is what you are doing now. You are terrorizing her." I felt a surge of frustration. It was like trying to argue with a cult member. Logic didn't matter. Evidence didn't matter. Belief was everything. Lucas, I said, firming my voice. I am a 70-year-old man with a broken back. I do not care about controlling Sylvia. I care about walking again. I care about my pension, so I do not die in a state-run facility. I do not have the energy to stalk anyone. He laughed. A short, bitter sound. Energy. You always have energy for a grudge. Mom said you hired someone. Or maybe you bribed a nurse to let you out for a few hours. I do not know how you did it. I do not have your devious engineering brain. But I know she is not lying. Why? I asked. Why are you so sure? Because I saw her face. He yelled, and the nurse outside glanced through the glass window. I saw her face when she called me last week. She could barely breathe. She said she came home and found cigarette ash on her porch. You smoke that same brand. She found footprints in the mud under her window. Size 11. Your size. She is terrified, Dad. She is losing weight. She is shaking all the time. He took a deep breath, his chest heaving. She is my mother. I have to protect her. And if that means standing up to you, then I will do it. I looked at him and I saw the tragedy of it all. Lucas was a good man. He had a soft heart. Too soft. Sylvia knew exactly where to press to get what she wanted. She wasn't just acting, she was directing a masterpiece. By playing the fragile damsel in distress, she turned our son into her knight in shining armor. And to be the knight, he had to slay the dragon. I was the dragon. Son, I said quietly, I am sorry she is in pain. I really am. But her pain is not proof of my guilt. Sometimes people see what they fear. Sometimes they invent monsters to explain their own unhappiness. Stop it, he hissed. Just stop. Stop analyzing her. Stop acting like you are the smartest person in the room. You think you can talk your way out of everything, but you cannot talk your way out of pictures. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the distant chatter of the nurse's station. Pictures, I repeated. Lucas reached into his pocket. His hand was shaking. He pulled out his smartphone. The screen was cracked at the corner. He unlocked it with a swipe of his thumb. You want logic? He said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You want evidence? Here, explain this. He thrust the phone toward my face. The brightness of the screen stung my eyes. I squinted, trying to focus. It was a photo taken at night, but illuminated by a street lamp. It was grainy like most digital zooms, but the subject was clear enough. A man was standing behind a large oak tree. He was looking toward a house, Sylvia's house. I recognized the beige siding and the white shutters I had installed myself 10 years ago. The man was older. He was hunched over slightly, favoring his left side, just like me. He was wearing a hat pulled low, a gray newsboy cap. I had a cap just like that hanging in my closet at home. But it was the jacket that made my heart stop. It was an army green field jacket, canvas material, faded at the elbows. It had a distinct tear on the right pocket that had been sewn shut with black thread. A clumsy repair job I had done myself on a job site 5 years ago. I stared at the image. My brain tried to process what I was seeing. That was my jacket. There was no doubt about it. I knew every thread of that coat. I knew the smell of diesel and sawdust that lived in its fibers, and the man wearing it. He had my build, my height, my posture. For a second, I doubted my own sanity. Did I do this? Did I black out from the pain medication and drive 3 hours to Albany? Did I sleepwalk through a nightmare I couldn't remember? No, impossible. The pain in my spine screamed the truth. I couldn't walk 10 feet, let alone drive a car. But the photo was there. undeniable, real. Lucas watched my face closely, tracking the shock in my eyes. He took my silence as a confession. "See?" he said softly, triumphantly. "You recognize it. You recognize yourself." I looked up at him. My mouth was dry. "Lucas," I whispered, "that is my jacket." "Yeah," he said, pulling the phone back. "It is. And that is you inside it." "No." I shook my head slowly. "That is the problem, son. That jacket is in the closet of my house, the house I haven't been to in a month, the house your mother has the spare key to." Lucas sneered. "Nice try. Blame her again." "You are pathetic." He shoved the phone back into his pocket. "I am done listening to your lies. The lawyers will handle this. I just wanted to look you in the eye and see if there was any remorse. Clearly I was wrong." He turned to leave. "Lucas, wait." I called out, desperation creeping into my voice. "If that is my jacket, how did it get to Albany? Think, Lucas. Think." He didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He walked out the door, and the heavy silence of the hospital room crashed back down on me. I laid my head back against the pillow. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. It wasn't just a false accusation anymore. It was a setup, a meticulous, detailed, staged production. Sylvia hadn't just lied. She had stolen my clothes. She had hired an actor. She had dressed him up like a doll to play the part of the villain in her grand tragedy. And the terrifying part wasn't that she did it. The terrifying part was that looking at that photo for a split second, even I believed her. If she could fool me, how was I ever going to convince a judge? I reached for the call button again. My hand was steady now. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. The engineer was back online. I needed to examine the structure of this lie. And I knew exactly where to start. That jacket had a secret, a flaw in the design that only I knew about. And if that man in the photo was really me, the camera would have caught it. But if it was an imposter, he would have missed it. I needed that photo, and I needed to make a call. The game had just changed. I wasn't fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for my life. I watched the door close behind Lucas, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the lead apron they drape over you during X-rays. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and cold. My hand still clutched the phone Lucas had left behind on the bedside table in his haste. Or maybe he left it as a final act of cruelty, forcing me to confront the evidence. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, not from age or fear, but from a terrifying confusion that was starting to claw at the edges of my sanity. I zoomed in on the photo again. The screen resolution was high enough to see the texture of the fabric. That jacket. It wasn't just a green jacket. It was my skin. I had bought that field jacket 20 years ago at a surplus store in Ohio when I was supervising the bridge repair on I-70. It had molded to my body over 2 decades of sweat, rain, and concrete dust. I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose and brought the screen inches from my eyes. There. On the left sleeve, just above the cuff, a dark, irregular splotch. It looked like a shadow to anyone else, but I knew what it was. Hydraulic fluid. I had spilled it when a hose burst on a crane in 2010. It never washed out. I had tried scrubbing it with everything from dish soap to gasoline, but the stain remained a stubborn tattoo of my career. And there it was in the photo. The exact same shape. The exact same position. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that set off the alarms on the monitor next to me. A nurse poked her head in, so I was just looking at a phone and silenced the alarm without a word, but I barely noticed her. My mind was racing down a dark, terrifying tunnel. "How?" I whispered to the empty room. "How is this possible?" I looked at the date stamp on the photo. October 15th, 9:45 p.m. I tried to reconstruct that night in my head, but it was a fog. A thick gray haze of morphine and oxycodone. The pain management team had me on a drip that made days bleed into nights. I remembered flashes, the ceiling tiles, the taste of grape jello, the sound of the janitor buffing the floors in the hallway. But were those memories real? Or were they just the brain trying to fill in the blanks? Could I have done it? The thought was a cold snake coiling in my gut. I had heard stories of people on high doses of Ambien, driving cars, making meals, even having conversations that they never remembered. Was it possible that I had unlocked the safety bed rails, put on my street clothes, walked out to the parking lot, and driven 3 hours to Albany? No. I looked down at my legs. The incision on my lower back was fresh raw and held together by staples. The pain was a constant reminder of my limitations. If I tried to stand up now, I would collapse. How could I have done it 10 days ago when the trauma was even fresher? But the jacket, the stain, the posture. The man in the photo stood with his weight shifted to the right hip, just like I did, to relieve the pressure on my sciatic nerve. It was a habit I had developed over 10 years of chronic back pain. You don't fake that kind of body language. You live it. Maybe I am losing my mind, I thought. Maybe the stress of the surgery and the isolation has finally cracked the foundation. Maybe I have a split personality like in those movies Sylvia used to watch. A dark side that takes over when the engineer is asleep. The door opened again and I jumped, dropping the phone on the sheets. It wasn't the nurse. It was Lucas coming back for his phone. He didn't look at me. He walked to the bed, grabbed the device and turned to leave. His movements were stiff, angry. "Lucas," I said, my voice pleading. "That stain on the sleeve. The oil stain. Do you remember when I got that? You were 10 years old. You were playing with the dog near the site." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "I don't care about the stain, Dad," he said, his voice flat. "I care that my mother is terrified in her own home. I care that you have turned into someone I don't recognize. I didn't do this, son. I swear on your grandmother's grave I didn't do this. I don't know who that is, but it is not me." He turned then, and the look in his eyes broke something inside me that surgery couldn't fix. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. The kind of pity you have for a dog that needs to be put down. "Just stop lying," he said softly. "It is pathetic." The lawyer said, "If you plead guilty to a misdemeanor, you might get probation. Just take the deal. Get help before you destroy everything." He walked out, and this time he didn't come back. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the little dots in the pattern, trying to anchor myself to reality. 1, 2, 3, 4. I am Harrison Thorne. I am a structural engineer. I am sane. 5, 6, 7, 8. I did not drive to Albany. I did not stalk my wife. But doubt is a powerful solvent. It dissolves certainty. It eats away at conviction. I felt tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Frustration, helplessness, fear. Then the phone on the bedside table rang. The landline. Not my cell. I picked it up, expecting Rachel, my lawyer. "Hello, Mr. Thorne?" It wasn't Rachel. The voice was smooth, polished, and dripping with false concern. It was David Sterling, Sylvia's attorney, a shark in a $3,000 suit who had dragged out our divorce proceedings for 2 extra years just to bill more hours. "What do you want, David?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. "I am calling as a courtesy, Harrison," he said. "I just got off the phone with your son." He sounded very upset. "We all are. This situation is escalating in a way that is unfortunate for everyone." I didn't say anything. I knew better than to give him ammunition. "Sylvia is willing to make this go away." He continued. "She doesn't want to see you in jail. She knows you are unwell, physically and mentally. Get to the point, I snapped. The point is the morality clause in your settlement agreement. Paragraph 14, Section B. Any criminal conduct or behavior that causes public scandal or reputational damage to the other party allows for a renegotiation of assets. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew the clause. I had signed it thinking it was boilerplate nonsense. I never imagined I would be the one accused of criminal conduct. If you are convicted of stalking Harrison, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, or even if we just go to trial and make this public record, we will invoke the clause. We will go after the pension, the 401k, the bonds, everything. That is my retirement, I whispered. That is my life support. Then make the smart choice, he said. Sign the admission. Agree to the restraining order. Transfer the pension voluntarily to Sylvia as a settlement for emotional damages. Do that, and we drop the criminal charges. You stay out of jail. You keep your freedom. You just lose the money. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like toxic smoke. You have 24 hours, Harrison. After that, we file the motion to freeze your assets. Think about it. Do you really want to spend your recovery in a prison cell? The line went dead. I dropped the receiver onto the cradle. My hand was numb. They didn't just want to ruin my reputation. They wanted to erase me. Without that money, I couldn't pay for the rehab facility. I couldn't pay for the nurses. I would be destitute. A crippled old man living on the street or rotting in a state ward. The morality clause. It was a trap. A bear trap they had set 5 years ago, waiting for me to step into it. And now they had pushed me in. I looked at the window. It was dark outside. The city lights of New York were a blur of orange and white. Somewhere out there in the rain was a man wearing my face, wearing my jacket, destroying my life. I wasn't crazy. I knew that now. The timing was too perfect. The threat was too calculated. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a heist, and I was the bank. I reached for the call button again. I needed to pee, but I couldn't move. The humiliation washed over me, hot and shameful. This was what they wanted. To make me feel powerless. To make me give up. But as I lay there waiting for a stranger to come help me relieve myself, a spark ignited in the darkness of my mind. It was small, but it was hot. David Sterling had made a mistake. He had showed his hand too early. He revealed that this was about the money. Always about the money. If it was about safety, Sylvia wouldn't care about my pension. She would just want me in jail. But offering to drop charges in exchange for cash, that was blackmail. And blackmail leaves a paper trail. I closed my eyes and visualized the photo again. Not the man. The background. The details. The engineer in me pushed aside the victim. I needed to stop looking at what they wanted me to see and start looking at what they missed. The jacket. The stain. It was too perfect. Too identifiable. Like a costume designed to be recognized from the back row of a theater. I wasn't going to sign anything. I wasn't going to admit to a crime I didn't commit. I was going to find that jacket. And when I did, I was going to wrap it around David Sterling's neck and pull tight. But first, I had to survive the night. And I had to find out how a jacket I hadn't worn in 5 years had walked out of my closet and into a nightmare. I dialed Rachel's number with a finger that felt like lead. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, a metronome counting down the seconds of my freedom. I needed a lifeline. I needed my lawyer to tell me that David Sterling's threat was empty, that the morality clause was just a scare tactic, and that we would crush them in court. Rachel picked up on the second ring. Her voice was professional, crisp, the voice of a woman who didn't let emotions get in the way of a verdict. But today there was a hesitation in her greeting, a pause that lasted a fraction of a second too long. "Harrison," she said, "I was just about to call you. We have a problem." I gripped the phone tighter. A problem. That was a polite word for a disaster. Did you talk to Sterling? I asked. Did you tell him I am not signing anything? I spoke to him, she said, and I could hear the rustling of papers in the background. But that is not the problem. The problem is the discovery file they just sent over. It is not just the photos anymore, Harrison. They have a witness. I felt the air leave my lungs. A witness. Photos could be faked. Photos could be staged. But a human being standing in court, pointing a finger at me, that was different. Who? I demanded. Who could possibly witness me doing something I didn't do? A barista, Rachel said. At a coffee shop in Albany called The Daily Grind. It is 2 blocks from Sylvia's apartment. He claims you came in on the night of October 15th around 9:30. You were wearing a green army jacket and a newsboy cap. You looked wet from the rain. I closed my eyes. The detail was suffocating. And here is the kicker, Harrison. Rachel continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. You ordered a black coffee with 2 sugars and a cinnamon stick. My eyes snapped open. The room spun slightly. Black coffee, 2 sugars, a cinnamon stick. That was my order. It was a peculiar habit I had picked up living in New Orleans in my 20s. I never drank coffee any other way. It wasn't something you guessed. It was something you knew. Whoever did this didn't just look like me. They studied me. They knew my wardrobe. They knew my walk. And now they knew what I drank, Rachel. I said, my voice trembling. That is circumstantial. Anyone can order coffee. The witness picked you out of a 6-person photo lineup, Harrison. She cut me off. He said he remembered you because you were rude. You yelled at him for putting the cinnamon in before the coffee. He said you told him it ruins the extraction profile. I felt sick. That sounded like me. That sounded exactly like something the old grumpy Harrison would say. But I wasn't there. I was here. I was strapped to a bed with tubes coming out of my spine. Rachel, do you believe me? I asked the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. There was silence on the other end. A long, painful silence. I am your lawyer, Harrison. My job is to defend you, not to judge you. That is not an answer, I whispered. Look. She sighed. The evidence is overwhelming. We have photos. We have a credible witness. We have a motive. And we have your medical history, which shows you have been taking heavy doses of opioids. The prosecution is going to argue that you are in a fugue state, that you are acting out subconscious aggression toward your ex-wife. If we go to trial and lose, you lose the pension. You lose everything. So what are you saying? I am saying you should consider the settlement. Pleading no contest to the restraining order protects your assets. It ends this. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't listen to her anymore. Even Rachel, the shark, the fighter, had given up. She thought I was crazy. She thought I was a drug-addled old man terrorizing a woman I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. I was alone, truly alone. I stared at the ceiling tiles. If the outside world wouldn't help me, I had to find the answer inside these walls. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof that I never left this building. I smashed the call button. I didn't care if I was being a nuisance. I needed the nurse. A young male nurse walked in. His name tag said Kevin. He looked tired. Mr. Thorne, Kevin said. You need to calm down. Your blood pressure is spiking. I don't care about my blood pressure, I hissed. I need the logs. The logs. The floor logs, Kevin. The night of October 15th. Who was on duty? When did they check on me? Bring me the shift report. I cannot just give you patient records. They are my records. I am the patient. Bring them to me, or I will scream until the hospital administrator comes down here." Kevin looked at me, saw the desperation in my eyes, and nodded. He disappeared and returned 10 minutes later with a tablet. "Here," he said, scrolling through a list. "October 15th. Night shift. Nurse Sarah checked on you at 8 p.m. Vitals stable. Patient asleep. Checked again at 10 p.m. Patient asleep. Checked again at midnight. Administered pain meds." "See?" I pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Patient asleep. I was here." Kevin looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Mr. Thorne," he said gently, "patient asleep is just a code we use when we look in the room and the lights are off. We do not wake you up to check ID. If you had, put pillows under the blanket." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He was saying it was possible. It was possible I had slipped out. "The cameras," I said, my voice rising. "The hallway cameras. There is a camera right outside my door. It sees everyone coming and going. If I left, it would see me." "Check the footage." Kevin bit his lip. "We already did," he said softly. "The police asked for it this morning." "And?" I held my breath. The camera system on the 4th floor was down for scheduled maintenance from 8:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 15th. There is no footage. I stared at him. My mouth fell open. "Down," I whispered. "It happens." Kevin shrugged helplessly. "Usually once a month for updates. It was just bad timing." "Bad timing." "No. In engineering, there is no such thing as bad timing when a bridge collapses. There is only structural failure or sabotage. A specific window of time. The exact window when the imposter was in Albany buying coffee and staring at Sylvia's window. The cameras were off. The logs were generic. The witness was prepped. This wasn't just a stalker case. This was a conspiracy. Someone had access to the hospital's security schedule. Someone knew exactly when to strike. Kevin left, taking the tablet with him. I lay back against the pillows, feeling the weight of the building pressing down on my chest. I was trapped in a box. The walls were made of lies, and the mortar was my own past. My phone buzzed again. Not a call. A text. I didn't want to look. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall and close my eyes and wait for the morphine to take me away. But I was Harrison Thorne. I didn't run. I picked up the phone. Unknown number. I opened the message. It was short. Brutal. And it shattered the last illusion that this was about Sylvia's safety. The message read, "Stop fighting Harrison. We know about the spinal stimulator data, but we can suppress it if you cooperate. Admit to the stalking. Sign over the pension. Do it for Lucas. You do not want him to see his hero father in an orange jumpsuit. He is fragile. He might do something stupid if he thinks his dad is a monster." I read it twice, then 3 times. The tone. It was wrong. Sylvia wrote in long, wandering, emotional paragraphs. She used words like trauma and healing and fear. This message was precise, transactional, cold. It mentioned the spinal stimulator. I froze. I had only mentioned the stimulator to Rachel and the doctor an hour ago. How did they know? And then the threat about Lucas. Sylvia protected Lucas. She coddled him. She wouldn't threaten his mental stability. This wasn't Sylvia. This was someone else. Someone who wanted the money desperately. Someone who knew the legal system. Someone who knew my medical condition in real time. We know about the spinal stimulator data, but we can suppress it. They knew I was looking for the data. They were watching me, not from outside, but from somewhere close. The text wasn't from a scared ex-wife. It was from a predator who had made a mistake. They got greedy. They showed me that this wasn't about love or hate. It was a heist. And for the first time since the process server walked in, I stopped feeling like a victim. The fear in my chest began to cool, hardening into something steelier, something dangerous. They were threatening my son to get to my money. I typed a reply. My thumb hovered over the send button. I didn't send a plea. I didn't send a denial. I typed 3 words. Come and get it. But I didn't hit send. Instead, I took a screenshot. This was the first crack in their armor, the first piece of evidence that didn't fit the narrative of the crazy stalker. I looked at the oil stain on the jacket in my memory. I looked at the text message. 2 loose threads. I was going to pull them both, and I was going to bring the whole tapestry down. But first I had to survive the isolation, because now I knew the enemy wasn't just in Albany. The enemy was listening, maybe even in this room. I looked at the smoke detector on the ceiling. I looked at the vent. I looked at the phone in my hand. I turned the phone off. Power down. Silence. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but it would be on my terms. I closed my eyes and began to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a lie. Every structure has a breaking point. I just had to find theirs before my own spine gave out completely. I turned my phone back on, but I kept it in airplane mode. I didn't want texts. I didn't want threats. I wanted the photos. I forwarded the email from Lucas to the nurse's station printer. Then I pressed the call button with a rhythmic insistence that I knew would annoy them, but I didn't care. I was done being the polite patient in room 402. I was the site foreman now, and I had a job to inspect. When the night nurse walked in, she looked ready to scold me, but I cut her off. I need you to bring me the papers I just sent to your printer. Please. It is a matter of life and death. I must have looked deranged or maybe just incredibly desperate because she didn't argue. She came back 5 minutes later with a stack of warm paper. I spread them out on the hospital blanket. My legs were numb, but my hands were steady. I adjusted my glasses and leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pull of the staples in my back. This was my domain. For 40 years I had looked at blueprints, seeking out the structural weaknesses that could bring a bridge down. I looked for stress fractures in concrete. I looked for rust in steel. Now I was looking for the cracks in a lie. The photos were high resolution. Sylvia's private investigator had used a good camera. That was his first mistake. High definition captures the truth just as well as it captures the lie. I picked up the first image, the one of the man standing by the tree. I ignored the man this time. I looked at the world around him. The affidavit claimed this was taken on October 15th at 9:45 p.m. in Albany. I reached for my tablet and opened the National Weather Service archives. I typed in the date and location. Albany, New York. October 15th. Historical weather data. The screen loaded. Precipitation 1.2 inches. Wind speeds 20 miles per hour. Conditions heavy rain and overcast. I looked back at the photo. The ground was wet. That fit the narrative. There were puddles reflecting the street lamps. But then I looked closer. I looked at the truck parked behind the man, my old Ford F-150. Underneath the truck there was a shadow, a hard, defined shadow stretching out to the left. I frowned. Physics is absolute. You do not get hard shadows in a rainstorm. When it rains, the sky is a giant diffuser. Light is scattered. Shadows are soft, undefined gray blobs. But this shadow had a sharp edge. It was the kind of shadow cast by a directional light source like the moon or a clear street light in dry air. I looked at the puddles again. They were still, glassy. If it was raining hard enough to accumulate over an inch of water, there should be ripples. There should be disturbance on the surface of the water. These puddles were mirror smooth. I grabbed a red pen from the bedside table and circled the shadow. Lie number 1. It wasn't raining when this photo was taken, which meant it wasn't taken on October 15th in Albany. Or if it was taken hours before the alleged stalking incident. But that wasn't enough. Weather data could be argued. Maybe the rain stopped for a moment. Maybe the street lamp was incredibly bright. I needed something solid, something steel. I moved to the second photo, the one of the truck parked on the street, the Ford F-150. I had bought that truck brand new in 2005. We had driven it across the country. I had hauled lumber, cement, and steel in that bed. I knew every rattle and every squeak of that machine. I studied the rear bumper. It was chrome covered in mud, but on the left side, right near the license plate light, there was a dent, a distinct V-shaped crimp in the metal. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. I remembered the day I got that dent. I was backing into a loading dock in Queens, and a rookie forklift driver had left a pallet jack sticking out too far. I had been so angry I nearly fired him. That dent was my signature. It was proof that this was indeed my truck. But then my smile faded, and a cold realization washed over me. I sold that truck. 6 months ago, right after my diagnosis, I knew I wouldn't be driving for a long time. The transmission was slipping, and the head gasket was blown. It was going to cost more to fix than the truck was worth. So I called a scrapyard in New Jersey, a place called Miller's Auto Salvage. They came with a flatbed tow truck. I handed them the title. I watched them winch it up the ramp. I watched them drive away with my old life on the back of their rig. I sold it for scrap. It was non-operational. It wasn't road legal. The plates were surrendered to the DMV. So how in God's name was it parked on a street in Albany 6 months later looking exactly the same as the day I sold it? I tapped the photo with my finger. If the truck was sold for scrap, it should be a cube of metal by now, or at the very least it should be stripped for parts, unless it wasn't scrapped, unless someone bought it from the yard, someone who needed a prop, someone who needed a vehicle that could be tied back to Harrison Thorne but couldn't be traced through current registration because it didn't have any. I looked at the license plate in the photo. It was covered in mud. Convenient. Too convenient. You could see just enough of the yellow New York plate to know it was local, but not enough to read the numbers. I closed my eyes and let the logic assemble itself. Sylvia didn't just hire an actor. She or her partner acquired my old vehicle. They went to the trouble of tracking down the exact truck I used to drive. That took effort. That took planning. That took access to my personal records to know where I sold it. Miller's Auto Salvage. I needed to call them. But it was 2 a.m. I looked at the photo again. The dent, the shadow, the mud on the plate. This wasn't just a frame job. This was theater. They had built a set. They had cast a lead actor. They had sourced props. And like every production, there was a budget. And there was a paper trail. I felt a surge of adrenaline that cut through the morphine haze. I wasn't just a helpless patient anymore. I was an engineer looking at a faulty blueprint. And I had just found the structural flaw that would bring the whole building down. The truck shouldn't exist. But it did. Which meant someone saved it. And if I could find out who walked into Miller's Auto Salvage and bought a broken-down Ford F-150 with a blown transmission, I would have the name of the person trying to destroy me. I looked at the threatening text message again. "Come and get it," I had typed. I picked up the red pen and wrote on the margin of the photograph. Item 1. The impossible weather. Item 2. The zombie truck. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I had a lot of work to do. I had to draft a subpoena for a junkyard in New Jersey. And I had to do it before the sun came up and the lawyers started calling again. My back throbbed, a reminder of my physical weakness. But my mind was sharpening, honing itself into a weapon. You made a mistake, Sylvia, I whispered to the empty room. You used the real truck. You wanted it to look authentic. You wanted it to look perfect. But you forgot that I know my own wreckage better than anyone. I waited until 6 in the morning to call Rachel. It was the earliest time I could justify waking a lawyer without being fired as a client. But I had been awake for hours, staring at the red circle I had drawn on the photograph. The sun was just starting to bleed through the blinds of room 402, turning the gray hospital walls a sickly yellow. My back was stiff, the muscles seizing up from tension, but my mind was vibrating with a frequency I hadn't felt in years. It was the hum of a problem being solved. When Rachel picked up, her voice was thick with sleep, but she snapped to attention the moment I said the words, Miller's Auto Salvage. I didn't give her a chance to argue or tell me to rest. I gave her orders. I needed a private investigator on the ground in New Jersey immediately. Not just anyone. I needed Mike. Mike was a former NYPD detective who had retired early after taking a bullet in the leg. He was cynical, expensive, and thorough. Exactly the kind of man you want looking for a ghost truck. I told Rachel exactly what to ask. Find out if the Ford F-150 with the dented bumper was actually crushed. Find out if there is a record of the destruction. Because if there isn't, then that truck is still out there, and it is the weapon being used to assassinate my character. Rachel hesitated for a moment, sensing the mania in my voice, but the logic was sound. She agreed to send Mike. Then the waiting began. The hours between 7 a.m. and noon were an agony that had nothing to do with my spine. Nurses came in to check my vitals and change my dressings. A physical therapist came in and tried to get me to sit up on the edge of the bed. I gritted my teeth and complied, sweating through my gown as I fought the gravity that wanted to crush my vertebrae. I did it not because I wanted to get better, but because I needed them to leave me alone. I needed the room empty so I could stare at my phone waiting for it to ring. Lucas didn't come. Sylvia didn't call. The silence from my family was deafening, but the silence from the investigation was worse. At 12:30, my phone finally buzzed. It was Rachel. I answered on the first ring, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We found it, Harrison," she said. Her voice wasn't sleepy anymore. It was sharp, alert. "Tell me," I said, squeezing the bedsheet. Mike went to the yard. He greased the palm of the yard manager, a guy named Miller. Rachel paused and I could hear her tapping on a keyboard. "Miller remembers your truck perfectly because 2 days after you dropped it off, a guy came in and offered to buy it. Cash, double the scrap value." I felt a surge of validation so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was right. "Did he get a name?" I asked. "Miller is running an off-the-books operation, Harrison. He didn't do a title transfer. He didn't ask for ID. He just took the cash and handed over the keys. He figured the truck was going to be used for farm work or parts since it wasn't street legal. But the guy did give a name. First name only." I held my breath. "Gavin," Rachel said. The name hung in the air like a discordant note. Gavin. It was a common name. It could be anyone. But my brain started to churn, sifting through 5 years of fragmented conversations and second-hand information. Gavin. Where had I heard that name? It wasn't a friend of mine. It wasn't a relative. Then I remembered. It was Lucas. About 6 months ago, Lucas had come to visit me at the house before the surgery. He was talking about how well Sylvia was doing after the divorce. He said she had joined a high-end gym in the city. He said she had a personal trainer who was really helping her work through her anger issues. He called him a miracle worker. He said Mom finally has someone who listens to her. What was his name? Uncle Gavin. That is what Lucas had jokingly called him. Good old Gavin. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The trainer. The man who was helping my ex-wife get strong physically and mentally. The man who had access to her vulnerabilities, her fears, and apparently her plot for revenge. Rachel. I said, my voice low and dangerous. Ask Mike if he can find a Gavin who works as a personal trainer in Albany. Check the gyms near Sylvia's apartment. I am already on it, Rachel said. Mike is way ahead of you. He ran a background check on associates of Sylvia Thorne. There is a Gavin Reynolds listed as a co-signer on her gym membership. He is 32 years old. No prior felonies, but a lot of debt. Credit card defaults, student loans. He is desperate for money. Desperate enough to drive a broken truck across state lines to frame an old man. Desperate enough to wear a costume and play a role for a cut of a $1.5 million pension. Send me a picture, I commanded. I need to see him. Hang on. Sending it now. I pulled the phone away from my ear and watched the screen. A message popped up a few seconds later. It was a surveillance photo taken from a distance, probably outside a gym or a coffee shop. I tapped the image to open it. The man in the photo was young. He was fit with broad shoulders and thick arms that strained against a tight black t-shirt. He had a square jaw and short cropped hair. He looked nothing like me in the face. But the build, the height. If you put him in a bulky field jacket and hunched him over, he would have the same silhouette as the man in the stalking photos. He looked strong, capable, the kind of man who could push a broken-down Ford F-150 out of a mud pit if he had to. But that wasn't what caught my eye. I zoomed in on his hands. He was holding a protein shaker bottle. He was holding it in his left hand. But on his right wrist, wrapped tightly around the thick muscle of his forearm, was a watch. It was a cheap digital sports watch with a black rubber strap. I froze. My eyes darted back to the printed photo of the stalker on my bedspread, the grainy image of the man in the rain standing by the tree. I grabbed the magnifying glass again. I looked at the stalker's right wrist. It was partially obscured by the sleeve of the army jacket, but there it was, a glint of black plastic. A watch. I looked down at my own arms. My left wrist was pale where my watch used to sit. I had worn a watch on my left wrist every day since I was 12 years old. I was left-handed. I wrote with my left hand. I held my coffee with my left hand. And like 90% of the population, I wore my watch on my non-dominant wrist to keep it out of the way. But Gavin was clearly right-handed, or at least he wore his watch on the right. I looked back at the surveillance photo. The watch on Gavin's wrist was distinctive. It had a large square face. I looked at the stalker photo. The bulge under the sleeve was square. It was a small detail, a tiny, insignificant habit that most people wouldn't notice. But structural engineering is built on small details. A missing bolt, a hairline fracture, a miscalculated load. This was the fracture. Gavin Reynolds forgot to switch his watch. He put on my jacket. He put on my hat. He drove my truck. But he kept his own watch on his own wrist. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. It was the feeling of a trap snapping shut. Rachel, I said into the phone, my voice steady and cold. I am looking at him, and I have got him. What do you see, Harrison? He is wearing his watch on the right hand, I said. The stalker in the photo is wearing a watch on the right hand. I am left-handed, Rachel. You know that. Everyone who knows me knows that. I have never worn a watch on my right hand in my life. There was a silence on the line as Rachel processed the information. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. That is it, she whispered. That is the physical discrepancy we need. It proves the man in the photo isn't you. It proves more than that. I said, staring at the face of the man who was trying to steal my life. It proves that Sylvia didn't just lie. She conspired. This is a stranger, Rachel. This is a third party. This changes it from a family dispute to a criminal conspiracy. I want everything on him. I continued, my voice rising with newfound strength. I want his financial records. I want his phone logs. I want to know how many times he called Sylvia in the last month. And Rachel, I want that truck found. If he bought it, he has to stash it somewhere. It is not street legal, so it is sitting in a garage or a driveway nearby. We will find it, Harrison. Mike is on it. I hung up the phone and looked at the picture of Gavin again. He looked so confident, so arrogant in his youth and strength. He thought he was preying on a weak old man. He thought I was just a body in a hospital bed waiting to die. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that I had spent my life building things that could withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. He didn't know that I was made of stronger stuff than muscle and bone. I looked at the door of my room. For the first time in days, I didn't feel trapped. The walls weren't closing in anymore. I was the one closing in. I picked up the red pen and drew a circle around Gavin's right wrist. Then I drew a line connecting it to the stalker's wrist. The bridge was built. Now I just had to cross it and burn it down behind me. The euphoria of finding the truck lasted exactly 45 minutes before the reality of the legal system came crashing back down. Rachel called again, her voice tight with frustration. She had spoken to a colleague in criminal defense, and his assessment was brutal. The truck proves fraud, she said. It proves someone bought your old vehicle. It proves someone is impersonating you. But Harrison, it doesn't prove you weren't the one driving it. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. The prosecution will argue that you bought it back through a proxy, Rachel explained. They will argue that you hired this Gavin character to purchase it for you so you could use it to terrorize Sylvia without it being traced to your name. Unless we can prove with absolute certainty that you were physically in that hospital bed at the exact moment the truck was in Albany, we are still vulnerable. I slammed the phone down onto the mattress. Damn it. Damn the law and its endless loopholes. I tried to sit up, fueled by a sudden burst of rage, but my body betrayed me. A spasm of pain so intense it felt like a lightning strike shot from my lower back down to my toes. I cried out, involuntarily gasping for air as the room spun. The pain was blinding. It was white-hot and relentless. A moment later, the door burst open. It was Dr. Evans, my neurosurgeon. He must have been nearby. Mr. Thorne, he said, rushing to my side. Don't move. You triggered the nerve cluster. He grabbed the remote control for the spinal cord stimulator, the device they had implanted under my skin 2 days ago. He tapped a few buttons, adjusting the electrical pulses that were supposed to mask the pain signals going to my brain. Breathe, Harrison. He said, his voice calm and authoritative. Just breathe. I am increasing the frequency. You should feel a tingling sensation replacing the pain. I gritted my teeth and focused on the ceiling tiles. Slowly, the agony began to recede, replaced by a dull, manageable hum. I lay there, panting, sweat soaking through my hospital gown. That device, I whispered, my voice hoarse. That thing in my back. What exactly does it do? It is a neurostimulator, Dr. Evans said, checking the readout on his tablet. It intercepts pain signals before they reach the brain. It is like a noise-canceling headphone for your nervous system. Does it track anything? I asked the question, forming slowly in my mind. Dr. Evans looked up from his screen, confused. Track. Does it record data? I said. Does it know what I am doing? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes, actually. It is a new model from Medtronic. It has a built-in accelerometer and a gyroscope. It tracks your activity levels, your body position, even your sleep patterns. We use the data to adjust the therapy. If you are active, we increase the stimulation. If you are lying down, we decrease it to save battery. I felt a chill go down my spine, but this time it wasn't pain. It was hope. Body position, I repeated, You mean it knows if I am standing up or lying down? Dr. Evans nodded. It knows if you are upright, supine, or prone. It knows if you are walking or sitting. It even detects the vibrations of a car ride versus the stillness of sleep. And where does this data go? I asked, my heart starting to race. It is uploaded to the cloud every 24 hours via the transmitter in your room. I looked at the small white box plugged into the wall outlet near the television. The transmitter. It had been sitting there blinking silently the whole time. Dr. Evans, I said, grabbing his wrist. My grip was weak, but my eyes were fierce. I need that data. I need the raw logs from October 15th between 8 p.m. and midnight. Why? He asked, frowning. Is something wrong with the device? No, I said. The device is perfect. It is the only witness I have that cannot be bribed. I explained everything. I told him about the lawsuit, the stalker, the truck, and the missing security footage. I told him that my freedom depended on proving I was horizontal in this bed when Sylvia claimed I was standing outside her window. Dr. Evans listened, his face turning grave. I can access the clinician portal, he said slowly. But I cannot just give you the data. It is protected health information. You are my doctor, I said, and I am authorizing you to release it to my lawyer. Right now, please, doctor. They are trying to take my life away. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. He tapped on his tablet, scrolling through menus I couldn't see. October 15th, he muttered. 8 p.m. to midnight. He swiped a finger across the screen, expanding a graph. Here it is, he said. I tried to lean over to see, but I couldn't. Tell me, I whispered. What does it say? Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses. At 8 p.m. you were in a supine position, lying on your back, angle of inclination 0 degrees, activity level 0.1. That is basically breathing. And at 9:45, I asked. That was the time the photo was taken. He scrolled. 9:45 p.m., still supine. No change in position. Heart rate 62 beats per minute. He looked up at me, a small smile touching his lips. Mr. Thorne, according to this device which is embedded inside your body, you didn't move a muscle for 4 hours. You were essentially a statue. If you had been driving a truck, the accelerometer would have gone crazy from the road vibration. If you had been standing in the rain, the gyroscope would have registered a vertical orientation. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for days. It is proof, I whispered. It is absolute scientific proof. It is better than video. Dr. Evans said, tapping the screen. Video can be edited. This is biometric telemetry. It is encrypted. It is time-stamped. And it is physically impossible to fake unless someone hacked into your spinal column. I laughed. A dry, rasping sound. So I have a witness, I said, opening my eyes. And he has been inside me the whole time. I have a witness in my spine. Dr. Evans stood up. I will export this report and send it to your attorney immediately. I will also write a medical affidavit explaining how the technology works, so the judge cannot dismiss it. Thank you, I said. Thank you, doctor. He patted my shoulder gently. Rest now, Harrison. You have got them. He left the room, and I lay there in the quiet. I looked at the little white transmitter on the wall. A plastic box. A collection of circuits and wires. It had saved me. I thought about Gavin. I thought about Sylvia. They had planned everything. The truck, the costume, the watch. They had accounted for the cameras. They had accounted for the nurses. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that we live in a world where everything is connected, even our bones. I picked up my phone and texted Rachel. Get the deposition ready, I typed. And tell the judge to bring a projector. I have a movie I want to show him. It is called The Man Who Never Moved." I smiled. The pain in my back was still there, a dull throb beneath the electric hum. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like armor. My broken back was going to break their case, and I couldn't wait to see the look on Sylvia's face when the truth came out, not from my mouth, but from the machine keeping me alive. The morning sun was trying to push through the heavy gray clouds outside my window, but inside room 402, the atmosphere was about to get much darker. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, visualizing the data from my spinal cord stimulator like a lifeline. I knew I had the winning hand. I knew I had the ace of spades tucked inside my own vertebrae. But now I had to do something much harder than engineering a bridge. I had to act. I had to play the part of the broken, confused old man they wanted me to be. I put the tablet away. I hid the notes I had made about the truck and the watch. I adjusted the bed to a semi-reclined position, letting my head loll to the side. I took off my glasses to make my eyes look unfocused and watery. I was ready for the performance of a lifetime. At 10 o'clock sharp, the door opened. David Sterling walked in first. He was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first car. He scanned the room with the predatory efficiency of a shark entering a reef. Once he deemed it safe, he stepped aside and motioned for someone behind him to enter. Sylvia stepped into the room. If I hadn't been married to her for 30 years, I might have believed it. She was a masterpiece of manufactured vulnerability. She was wearing a beige cardigan wrapped tightly around her thin frame and a long floral skirt that made her look modest and unassuming. She wasn't wearing makeup, or at least she was wearing the kind of makeup designed to make you look pale and tired. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She held a tissue in one hand and clutched the strap of her purse with the other as if she were holding onto a life raft. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, her shoulders hunched inward. She looked like a woman who had been hunted. A woman who hadn't slept in weeks because of the monster lying in the hospital bed. "Harrison." Sterling said, his voice smooth and dangerously low. "Thank you for seeing us. We wanted to keep this civil. We wanted to keep this out of the press." I turned my head, slowly blinking, as if I was struggling to recognize them. "Sylvia," I croaked. My voice was naturally raspy from the dry hospital air, but I added a tremor to it. "Sylvia, why are you here?" She flinched. A physical jerk of her body, as if my voice had struck her. She took a step back, hiding behind Sterling's shoulder. It was perfect. It was Oscar-worthy. The nurse checking the monitors in the corner looked at Sylvia with profound sympathy, and then looked at me with cold judgment. Sylvia had already won the audience. "We are here to offer you a way out, Harrison," Sterling said, walking to the foot of the bed. "We know you are in pain. We know your mind isn't what it used to be. The medication, the trauma of the surgery, it can make people do things they do not remember." I stared at him, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I didn't do anything." Sylvia made a small whimpering sound. She covered her mouth with the tissue. "Please, David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just tell him to sign. I cannot be here. I cannot look at him." "It is okay, Sylvia," Sterling said, patting her arm gently. "You are safe. He cannot hurt you here." He turned back to me, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a document. It was thick, bound in blue paper. "Harrison, look at your wife," Sterling said, pointing at Sylvia. "Look at what you are doing to her. She is terrified. She is seeing a therapist 3 times a week. She wakes up screaming because she thinks you are standing over her bed." I looked at Sylvia. She was shaking. Her hands were trembling visibly. "I am sorry," I mumbled, looking down at my hands. I never wanted to scare anyone. We know. Sterling said, his tone softening into a patronizing purr. We know it is not the real you, Harrison. It is the obsession. It is the sickness. That is why we want to help you close this chapter. He placed the document on the rolling tray table and pushed it over my lap. This is a settlement agreement, he explained. It states that you admit to the events of October 15th and 20th due to temporary mental incapacity. It grants Sylvia the restraining order she needs to feel safe, and in exchange for her not pressing criminal charges, you agree to transfer the entirety of your pension fund and your 401k to her as compensation for emotional distress. I looked at the papers. The numbers were blurry without my glasses, but I knew what they meant. They meant poverty. They meant I would be wheeled out of this hospital and dumped into a state facility to rot. But I kept my face blank. I kept my hands shaking. If I sign this, I asked, my voice weak, will you leave me alone? Yes, Sterling said, pushing a pen toward me. We will drop the lawsuit. The police will close the file. You can focus on your recovery. Sylvia just wants to move on. She wants you to get the help you need. I looked up at Sylvia again. She had moved slightly closer, peering out from behind her human shield. Her eyes met mine. For a second, the fear vanished, replaced by a cold, hard calculation. But it was gone so fast, I almost missed it. Harrison, Claw, she said, her voice breaking. Do it for us. Do it for the memory of what we used to be. I do not want to see you in prison. I just want peace. I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I let it tremble violently. I tapped the pen against the plastic tray, making a nervous, erratic sound. I am so confused, I whispered. I don't remember driving the truck. I don't remember any of it. But if you say I did it, maybe I did. You did, Harrison, Sterling said firmly. We have the photos. We have the witness. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Trust us. This is the only way to save yourself. I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the floor. I am sorry, I gasped, leaning back against the pillows, breathing heavily. I am so weak. I cannot even hold a pen. Sterling sighed, an impatient sound he tried to suppress. He bent down to pick it up, but Sylvia stopped him. I will get it, she said softly. She stepped forward. She moved with the grace of a dancer, her skirt swishing softly against the floor. She knelt down beside my bed. Her hand brushed against the sheets near my leg. She picked up the pen. She didn't stand up immediately. She stayed there close to me. Her face was inches from mine. From the door, it looked like a tender moment. A wife comforting her ailing ex-husband. A moment of forgiveness. The nurse in the corner smiled, sadly touched by the scene. Sterling watched with a satisfied smirk, thinking the deal was closed. But they couldn't see her eyes. Up close, the facade dissolved. The fear evaporated. The trembling stopped. Her eyes were dry and sharp as flint. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A smile I had seen 1,000 times before, when she got exactly what she wanted. She leaned in closer, pretending to adjust the blanket over my chest. Her hand rested on my shoulder, squeezing it hard. Too hard. Her nails dug into my gown. She brought her lips to my ear. Her breath was warm and smelled of expensive mints. Why are you fighting Harrison? She whispered. The sound was so low only I could hear it. It was like the hiss of a steam pipe. I froze. I stopped breathing. You are finished. She continued, her voice a venomous thread. You are broken. Look at you. You are a cripple. You cannot even wipe your own ass. She smoothed the blanket over my chest, her hand lingering over the incision site. I flinched, expecting her to press down to hurt me. She laughed softly, a sound that could have been mistaken for a sob. "Just sign the paper," she whispered. "Give me the money. You don't need it. You are not going to be around much longer anyway." I turned my head slightly, looking into her eyes. There was no humanity there. Only greed. Pure distilled greed. "Why?" I mouthed. "Because I deserve it," she hissed. "I wasted 30 years listening to you talk about bridges and loads and concrete. I was bored to death, Harrison. I deserve to be paid for my time." She leaned back slightly, checking to make sure Sterling and the nurse were still watching. Then she leaned in for the final strike. "Gia Roy, the Chet Sumdi." She whispered, the cruelty of the words hitting me harder than any physical blow. "Why keep the money? You are just a useless old man taking up space. Do us all a favor and die quickly." She pulled back abruptly and stood up. The mask slammed back into place instantly. She brought the tissue to her eyes and let out a choked sob. "Here is the pen, Harrison," she said, her voice loud enough for the room to hear, trembling with fake emotion. "Please, just sign it, for your own sake." She placed the pen back in my hand. Her fingers were warm. Her touch was poison. I lay there staring at her. The room was spinning, but not from weakness. It was spinning from the sheer magnitude of her malice. She didn't just want my money. She wanted me dead. She viewed my life as an inconvenience, a bureaucratic obstacle between her and a paycheck. For a moment, I felt a surge of pure rage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her throat. I wanted to tell the nurse what she had just said, but I stopped myself. If I screamed, I would look crazy. If I attacked her, I would prove their case. If I told them what she whispered, they would say I was hallucinating. No, I couldn't fight her with anger. I had to fight her with gravity. I had to let her climb higher. I had to let her think she had reached the summit. Because the fall is always deadliest from the top. I looked at the pen in my hand. Then I looked at Sylvia. "You are right," I said, my voice flat and dead. "I am old, and maybe I am confused." I moved the pen toward the signature line. Sterling took a step forward, his eyes hungry. Sylvia stopped crying and held her breath. I let the pen touch the paper. I drew a shaky line, but instead of signing my name, I let the pen slide off the page as if my hand had lost all strength. "I cannot," I whispered, letting my arm drop to the bed. "I am too tired. My eyes. I cannot see the line." Sterling made a noise of frustration. "Just make a mark," he said. "An X will do." "No," I said, closing my eyes. "I need to sleep. Come back tomorrow. I will sign it tomorrow. I promise." Sylvia looked at me with pure hatred. For a second I thought she was going to strike me, but she couldn't break character. Not now. "David," she said, her voice tight. "Let him rest. We will come back tomorrow." Sterling grabbed the papers. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Harrison. Do not make us wait, or we file the motion to freeze the accounts by noon." They walked out. Sylvia paused at the door. She looked back at me. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked impatient, like someone waiting for the trash to be taken out. The door clicked shut. I lay in the silence. The ghost of her whisper still echoed in my ear. "Die quickly." I reached under my pillow and pulled out my phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't going to die, and I wasn't going to sign. I opened my text messages. I found the thread with Rachel. "They just left." I typed. "She took the bait. She thinks I am broken. She thinks I am going to sign tomorrow morning." I hit send. Then I typed one more message. "Set up the deposition for tomorrow afternoon. And Rachel, bring the projector. It is showtime." I looked at the empty chair where Sylvia had sat. She thought she was the director of this play. She thought I was just a prop. But she forgot the first rule of engineering: potential energy. The higher you lift a weight, the harder it hits when you drop it. And tomorrow I was going to drop the whole world on her head. The door clicked shut, and I let out a breath that rattled deep in my chest. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a hunter waiting in a blind. I wiped the moisture from my eyes. Not tears, just the physical reaction to the strain of holding my body in a posture of defeat for 20 minutes. My back muscles were screaming in protest, but the pain was a dull roar compared to the clarity sharpening in my mind. I picked up the phone. Rachel answered on the first ring. She had been listening. I had kept the line open the entire time, tucked under the pillow. "Did you hear her?" I asked. My voice was no longer the trembling whisper of a senile old man. It was the voice of a site foreman barking orders over the noise of a jackhammer. "I heard her," Rachel said. Her voice was cold. I heard every word. The threat, the manipulation, and that final whisper. "Harrison, that is grounds for mental cruelty. We can use that." "No," I cut her off. "We are not using it. Not yet." "Words are just air, Rachel. She will deny it. She will say I imagined it, or that she was misunderstood. We do not need her to look mean. We need her to look like a criminal." "So what is the plan?" Rachel asked. "You refused to sign. They are going to file the motion to freeze your assets tomorrow at noon. We are on a clock." "Let them file," I said. "Let them think they have won. I want you to schedule the deposition for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Tell them I am ready to confess. Tell them I want to do it formally, so everything is legal. Tell them I want to clear my conscience before I expire." "You want to depose her?" Rachel asked sounded skeptical. "Harrison, if we depose her, she is going to repeat the same lies. It will just be on the record." "Exactly," I said. "That is the point. If she lies to the police, it is a misdemeanor. If she lies to you in a settlement negotiation, it is unethical. But if she lies in a deposition under oath, if she raises her right hand and swears to tell the truth, and then repeats this story while I have the evidence to prove she is lying, that is perjury. That is a felony. That is prison time." I could hear the gears turning in Rachel's head. "You want to trap her," she whispered. "I want to destroy the bridge while she is standing on it," I said. "But I need the final beam. I need to know where Gavin was." I hung up with Rachel and dialed Mike immediately. The private investigator answered with a mouthful of food. He sounded tired but alert. "Mike," I said, "I need you to focus. Forget the truck for a moment. We know he bought the truck. I need to place him in the driver's seat." "I am working on it, Harrison," Mike said, swallowing. "I pulled his credit card records. The guy is broke. He lives on cash. No paper trail. No easy pass records on the turnpike. He took back roads to avoid the tolls. Smart kid." "He is not smart," I said. "He is arrogant. And arrogant people make mistakes." Check the timeline again. The second incident, October 20th. Buffalo. Buffalo is a long drive from Albany," Mike mused. 3 hours each way." "Exactly," I said. "He drove my truck to Buffalo to stage a sighting near the mall where Sylvia was shopping. He stood in the parking lot in the rain wearing my jacket. But he had to get gas, Mike. That truck gets 12 miles to the gallon on a good day. If he drove 6 hours round trip, he stopped for gas." "I am checking the gas stations along the route," Mike said. "But Harrison, there are 50 stations between here and Buffalo. It is a needle in a haystack." "Then use the magnet," I snapped. "Look for the truck. It is a 1995 Ford F-150. Green. Dented bumper. It sticks out like a sore thumb. He didn't fill up at a main plaza. He would have used a cheap cash-only pump off the highway. Check the stations near the exits. I will do my best, Mike said. But these places overwrite their security footage every 48 hours. It has been 5 days. Just look, I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Find him, Mike. My life depends on it. I hung up and lay back against the pillows. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a throbbing ache in my lower lumbar. I reached for the pain button but stopped. I couldn't be groggy tomorrow. I couldn't be floating on a cloud of morphine when I faced Sylvia. I needed to be sharp. I needed to be the steel beam that doesn't bend. The night dragged on. The hospital was a symphony of quiet noises. The squeak of rubber shoes in the hallway. The distant chime of an elevator. The rhythmic whoosh of the respirator in the room next door. I closed my eyes and visualized the deposition. I saw the room, the long table, the camera. Sylvia sitting there looking fragile. Gavin may be lurking in the background or waiting in the car. They would be celebrating tonight, drinking champagne, toasting to the old fool who was about to sign away his life's work. They didn't know that the old fool was currently calculating the sheer force required to snap their narrative in half. I thought about Lucas, my son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. How had he become so blind? Was I really that distant? Did I really fail him so badly that he would believe a stranger over his own father? Maybe. Maybe I was hard on him. Maybe I expected too much. But I never lied to him. And tomorrow I was going to give him the hardest lesson of his life. The truth. 3 a.m. came and went, then 4. My phone buzzed. I snatched it up from the bedside table, knocking over a plastic cup of water. I didn't care. I swiped the screen. It was an email from Mike. The subject line was just one word. Gotcha. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened the email. There was no text, just a video file attachment. I tapped the play button. The little loading circle spun for what felt like an eternity. 10%. 30%. Come on, I whispered. Come on. The video popped open. It was grainy black and white footage from a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read October 20th, 8:45 p.m. The camera was positioned high up, looking down at a gas pump island. It was raining. You could see the streaks of water cutting through the glare of the overhead lights. A truck pulled into the frame. My truck. I recognized the profile instantly. The rust spot on the wheel well. The way the suspension sagged slightly to the left. It rolled up to pump number 4. The door opened. A figure stepped out. He was wearing the army jacket. My jacket. He was wearing the newsboy cap. My cap. He moved with a hunch, imitating my walk. He inserted the nozzle into the tank. Then he turned toward the building. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. He started walking toward the store entrance. As he walked under the canopy of the gas station, out of the direct rain, he did something that saved my life. He reached up and took off the hat. Maybe his head was itchy. Maybe he was hot. Maybe he just didn't think anyone was watching in a rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere. He pulled the cap off and ran a hand through his hair. Short cropped hair. Dark. He looked up at the light, checking the rain. The camera caught his face. It wasn't a perfect portrait. The lighting was harsh and the angle was steep. But it was clear enough. The square jaw, the thick neck, the arrogance in the set of his mouth. It was Gavin. And then, as if he wanted to sign his confession, he lifted his right hand to scratch his nose. On his right wrist, caught in the glare of the fluorescent lights, was the black square face of a digital sports watch. I paused the video. I zoomed in until his face filled the screen. I looked at the stranger who had been wearing my life like a costume. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt cold. Ice cold. I forwarded the video to Rachel. Then I typed a message. I have the smoking gun. Do not show it to them. Do not tell them. Let her swear on the Bible first. Let her dig the grave. We will push the body in later. I put the phone down and looked out the window. The sky was turning a bruised purple. Dawn was coming. I adjusted the bed to sit fully upright. I pressed the button to lower the headrest. I straightened my spine, ignoring the flare of pain. I wasn't going to be the invalid today. When the camera turned on for that Zoom call, I wanted to be sitting tall. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the hunter was awake. The projector hummed to life, casting a large rectangular beam of light against the white hospital wall. It was 10 a.m. The air in room 402 was thick with the scent of antiseptic and impending war. I asked Nurse Kevin to raise the head of my bed as high as it would go. I wasn't going to face them lying down. I wore a fresh hospital gown, but I had combed my hair and put on my glasses. I looked like what I was. A man who had been broken by surgery, but not by spirit. Rachel sat in the chair next to me, her laptop connected to the projector, her face set in a mask of professional neutrality. But I saw her hands. They were resting on the touchpad, ready to fire the torpedoes we had loaded into the presentation deck. The Zoom connection chimed, and the empty blue square on the wall was suddenly filled with faces. Top left was the court reporter, a woman who looked bored already. Top right was the mediator, a retired judge named Henderson, who looked like he just wanted to get to his lunch break. Bottom left was the enemy camp. David Sterling sat at the head of a mahogany conference table that gleamed under expensive office lighting. He looked confident, smug. He adjusted his silk tie and shuffled his papers, the universal gesture of a lawyer who thinks he has already won. Next to him sat Sylvia. She had changed her outfit from yesterday. Now she wore a high-necked black blouse that made her look severe and mourning. She held a handkerchief in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes before the proceedings even began. But it was the person sitting in the back of the room behind them that drew my gaze. Lucas. My son sat in a chair against the wall. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up slightly, as if he wanted to disappear. He didn't look at the camera. He stared at his sneakers, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He looked small. He looked defeated. Seeing him like that hurt more than the screws in my spine. He was there to witness his father's humiliation. He was there to see the monster slain. "Mr. Thorne, can you hear us?" Judge Henderson asked, his voice booming from the small speakers. "I can hear you," I said. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been yesterday. "Let the record show that the deposition of Harrison Thorne is now in session, Mr. Sterling. You may proceed." Sterling cleared his throat and leaned into the camera. He didn't waste time. He went straight for the throat. "Mr. Thorne, we are here to discuss the events of October 15th and October 20th. We are here to discuss a pattern of harassment, stalking, and intimidation directed at my client, Ms. Sylvia Thorne." I didn't answer. I just watched him. "We have submitted into evidence photographs taken by a private investigator." Sterling continued, holding up the familiar glossy print of the man in the rain. "These photos clearly show you Harrison Thorne standing outside the plaintiff's home in Albany, violating her privacy and causing her significant emotional distress. We also have a sworn affidavit from a witness at a local coffee shop who identified you positively from a lineup." He paused for effect, letting the weight of the evidence hang in the air. "The evidence is overwhelming, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You drove your truck to Albany. You stood in the rain. You terrorized a woman living alone. And now you are trying to hide behind a medical condition to avoid the consequences." He turned to Sylvia. Ms. Thorne, Sterling said gently, could you please tell the court in your own words what you saw that night? Sylvia took a deep breath. She looked straight into the camera lens. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with tears that she summoned on command. It was raining. She began, her voice trembling perfectly. I was in the kitchen making tea. I felt watched. I went to the window, and I saw him. She paused to wipe her eye. He was standing by the big oak tree across the street. He was wearing that old green army jacket, the one he wore when we were married, the one he wore when he used to get angry. I watched Lucas in the background. At the mention of the jacket, he flinched. He buried his face in his hands. I knew it was him. Sylvia continued, her voice gaining strength. I know his posture. I know the way he stands. He was just staring at me. He didn't move. He looked like he wanted to hurt me. I was so scared I locked myself in the bathroom and called my son. She turned slightly to look back at Lucas, as if involving him in her lie would validate it. I called Lucas and I told him Dad is here. Dad is outside. Lucas didn't look up. He just rocked slightly back and forth. And on the 20th, Sterling prompted. I went to the mall in Buffalo to get away, Sylvia said, to feel safe. But when I came out to the parking lot, I saw the truck, his truck, the Ford, and I saw him standing there again. He was watching me, following me. I felt like I was being hunted. She broke down then. A sob escaped her throat, a raw sound of distress. I just want it to stop, she cried into the tissue. I just want him to leave me alone. I am afraid for my life. Sterling put a comforting hand on her shoulder. He looked at the camera with righteous indignation. You see, Your Honor, this is a broken woman, and the man responsible is lying in that hospital bed, pretending to be the victim. Judge Henderson looked at me. His expression was stern. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, you have heard the accusations. You have seen the evidence. Your counsel has indicated you might be willing to make a statement. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Rachel looked at me. She nodded slightly. This was the signal. I reached for the control to lower the bed slightly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to lean in. I wanted to be closer to the lens. I do, Your Honor, I said. I looked at the screen. I ignored Sterling. I ignored the judge. I locked my eyes on Sylvia. I don't want to make a statement yet, I said. I want to ask the plaintiff a question. Sterling jumped in. Objection. This is a deposition, not a cross-examination. I will allow it. Judge Henderson said, sounding curious. But keep it brief, Mr. Thorne. I took a breath. My heart was pounding, but my hands were still. Sylvia, I said, my voice low and hard. Look at me. She looked up from her tissue. Her eyes met mine through the digital void. She looked annoyed that I was speaking. She expected me to be groveling by now. You just swore an oath, I said. You swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Do you understand what that means? Of course I do. She snapped, her sadness momentarily replaced by defensiveness. It means that if you lie now, I continued, if you knowingly state a falsehood on this record, you are committing perjury. That is a felony, Sylvia. You can go to prison for up to 7 years. Sterling laughed, a short bark of disbelief. Are you threatening my client, Mr. Thorne? I am warning her, I said, cutting him off. I looked back at Sylvia. You said you saw me. You said you saw Harrison Thorne standing under that tree. You said you saw me in the parking lot. I did. She said, her chin going up. I know what I saw. Are you sure? I asked. I leaned closer to the camera until my face filled the frame. Because Sylvia memories can be tricky. Maybe it was dark. Maybe it was someone who looked like me. Maybe it was a mistake. If you say right now that you might be mistaken, we can stop this. You can walk away. But if you insist it was me, there is no going back. I saw a flash of hesitation in her eyes. Just a flicker. She looked at Sterling. He nodded slightly, encouraging her. She looked at Lucas curled up in the chair. She had to maintain the lie for him. She had gone too far to turn back. She looked back at me. Her face hardened into a mask of absolute certainty. I am not mistaken, she said, her voice icy. I know my husband. I lived with you for 30 years. I know your silhouette. I know your clothes. And then she said the words. The specific fatal words I had been waiting for. I recognized you because of the way you walk, Harrison. That wretched limp you have had for 10 years. I saw you shifting your weight to your right leg just like you always do. I saw you dragging your left foot. No one else walks like that. It was you. I am 100% certain. I sat back against the pillows. A sensation of cold clarity washed over me. She had done it. She had locked the door and thrown away the key. She claimed she saw me walking. She claimed she saw me limping. She claimed she saw me standing. I looked at Rachel. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this. Only the grim satisfaction of a demolition expert pressing the plunger. Thank you, Sylvia, I said softly. That is all I needed to hear. I turned to Rachel. Show them. Rachel hit a key on her laptop. The image of the faces on the wall shrank to the corner. The main screen was filled with a new document. It was a graph, a complex medical chart with lines and peaks and valleys. Sterling squinted at the screen. What is this? This, I said, is the telemetry data from the Medtronic spinal cord stimulator implanted in my vertebrae. It records every movement my body makes. It records my angle, my speed, my heart rate. I watched Sylvia's face. She didn't understand yet. But Sterling did. His face went pale. And this. I pointed to the flat line on the graph. Is the data from the night of October 15th. The night you swore under oath that you saw me walking, limping, and standing under your tree. I let the silence stretch. According to this machine which is inside my body, I said, I was lying flat on my back in this hospital bed. I didn't move for 4 hours. I didn't walk. I didn't drive. And I certainly didn't limp. I looked at Sylvia. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And Sylvia, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, if I couldn't walk. Then who was wearing my jacket? Rachel hit the next key. The video from the gas station appeared. The man in the green jacket stepped out of the truck. He took off his hat. He looked up at the light. Lucas stood up in the background. He moved closer to the screen. He stared at the face of the man in the video. Mom. Lucas whispered, his voice audible over the microphone. That is Gavin. The room on the screen erupted into chaos. But in my hospital room it was perfectly silent. The bridge had collapsed, and Sylvia was falling into the abyss. Rachel stood up, and the movement was so sharp it felt like she had drawn a sword. She didn't shout. She didn't slam her hand on the table. She spoke with the quiet, terrifying precision haunt of a surgeon who has just found the tumor and is ready to cut it out. Your Honor. Rachel said, her voice echoing slightly in the small hospital room. The plaintiff has just testified under oath that she saw Harrison Thorne walking, standing, and limping in Albany on the night of October 15th. She was unequivocal. She was certain. Rachel tapped a key on her laptop, and the projection on the wall shifted. The graph zoomed in, focusing on a specific block of time. But there is a problem with her testimony. Rachel continued, pointing at the screen. A physical impossibility. Because at the exact moment Ms. Thorne claims my client was standing under her oak tree, his spinal column was transmitting data from a hospital bed in New York City. Judge Henderson leaned forward in his chair. His face filled the screen, his eyebrows knitted together in confusion and intrigue. "Explain this, Ms. Zane," the judge commanded. "What are we looking at?" "This is a biometric log from a Medtronic spinal cord stimulator," Rachel explained. "It is an implanted medical device fused to Mr. Thorne's vertebrae. It contains a high-sensitivity accelerometer and a gyroscope. It records position and movement to manage pain therapy." She traced the flat line on the graph with her laser pointer. The red dot moved steadily across the horizontal axis. "This red line represents the vertical orientation of the patient's torso," Rachel said. 0 degrees means flat. 90 degrees means upright. As you can see, from 8 p.m. to midnight on October 15th, the line is perfectly flat at 0 degrees. She moved the pointer to a blue line that rippled gently at the bottom of the chart. "And this blue line is the vibration index." Rachel continued. "It detects impact, steps, the rumble of an engine. If Mr. Thorne had been driving a truck, this line would be spiking like a seismograph during an earthquake. If he had been walking or limping, it would show rhythmic peaks." She looked directly at the camera, staring down Sterling and Sylvia. "But as you can see, the line is almost comatose. The only movement registered is the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest as he breathed." The room on the screen was frozen. Sterling was staring at the graph, his mouth slightly open, his mind racing to find a defense. Sylvia looked at the lines and curves as if they were alien hieroglyphs. She didn't understand the science, but she understood the silence. She understood that something had gone terribly wrong with her script. So unless Mr. Thorne has discovered a way to detach his consciousness from his body and project it astrally to Albany. Rachel said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "He was physically located in bed 402 of Mount Sinai Hospital. He was not stalking anyone. He was trying to survive a spinal fusion." Judge Henderson sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who had just seen a magic trick explained and realized how simple the deception was. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice grave, "do you have an explanation for this? Your client just swore she saw him limping. This data suggests he couldn't even sit up." Sterling scrambled. He stood up, knocking his expensive pen onto the floor. He didn't pick it up. He was sweating now. A sheen of perspiration glistened on his forehead under the office lights. "Objection, Your Honor," Sterling stammered. "This evidence was not disclosed in discovery. We haven't had time to have our own experts analyze it. And frankly, we question the authenticity of this data." He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Mr. Thorne is a structural engineer," Sterling said, grasping at straws. "He is a technical genius. Who is to say he didn't hack the device? Who is to say he didn't alter the logs? We live in an age of cybercrime, Your Honor. This is a digital fabrication. He probably wrote a program to spoof the signal while he was driving the truck." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest. It was absurd. I could barely use the hospital remote control, let alone hack a proprietary medical device from the inside of my own body. Rachel didn't laugh. She just shook her head. "The device is encrypted with a 256-bit key," she said calmly. "It uploads directly to the manufacturer's cloud server. We obtained these logs directly from Dr. Evans, the chief of neurosurgery, who has submitted a sworn affidavit authenticating them. If you are accusing a 70-year-old man on morphine of hacking a multi-billion-dollar medical company, you are going to need more than a theory, Mr. Sterling." Sterling turned red. He looked at Sylvia, who was now pulling at the collar of her black blouse as if it were choking her. "It is possible." Sterling insisted, his voice rising an octave. "He is obsessive. He is capable of anything. We stand by Ms. Thorne's testimony. She saw him. Eyes do not lie. Machines do." Judge Henderson looked skeptical. He looked from the frantic lawyer to the calm graph on the screen. "The court tends to trust telemetry over memory, Mr. Sterling," the judge said. "Unless you can prove the device was tampered with, this contradicts your client's entire timeline." Sylvia let out a sound. It was half gasp, half sob. He was there. She cried out, her voice shrill. "I know what I saw." He was wearing the green jacket. He took off his hat. "I saw his face." Rachel looked at me. I nodded. It was time. The data was the shield. Now we needed the sword. "If you do not trust the machine, Mr. Sterling," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a conversational tone, "if you think the data is too abstract, perhaps you would prefer something more traditional." Sterling stopped moving. He looked at Rachel with the eyes of a trapped animal. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "You said eyes don't lie." Rachel said, "We agree. But Ms. Thorne's eyes aren't the only ones watching." She minimized the graph. The desktop of her laptop appeared. In the center of the screen was a single video file icon. "We found the truck, Mr. Sterling," Rachel said. "And we found the driver." She double-clicked the file. The media player opened. The black and white footage of the gas station filled the projection on the wall. The timestamp in the corner read, October 20th, 8:45 p.m. Sylvia leaned forward. Her eyes went wide. She stopped breathing. Sterling froze. And in the back of the room, Lucas stood up slowly. He walked toward the conference table, drawn by the image on the screen like a moth to a flame. Rachel hit play. The grainy rain-soaked video began to roll. The beat-up Ford F-150 pulled into the frame. The driver's door opened, and the man in the green jacket stepped out. The video played on in silence, but the images screamed the truth louder than any confession. On the projection screen, the man in the green army jacket stood at the counter of the gas station convenience store. He was relaxed. He was smiling. He leaned casually against the counter and flirted with the cashier, a young woman with pink hair. He laughed at something she said, throwing his head back in a gesture of pure, arrogant youth. There was no limp. There was no hunch. There was only the swagger of a man who thought he had committed the perfect crime. He reached into the pocket of my jacket, my old jacket, and he pulled out a wad of cash to pay for his cigarettes. As he did, he turned slightly, and the overhead fluorescent lights caught his face perfectly. It was Gavin Reynolds. The silence in the deposition room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb has gone off, but the sound hasn't caught up to the blast wave yet. Sylvia sat frozen in her chair. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the screen where her lover was wearing her ex-husband's skin. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She didn't breathe. She didn't move. She was watching her entire life unravel frame by frame. In the background, Lucas took a step closer to the screen. His face was pale, his expression one of utter disbelief. He reached out a trembling hand, as if he wanted to touch the image to make sure it was real. "Gavin," Lucas whispered. His voice was cracked and broken. "That is Gavin." He turned to his mother. The movement was slow, like he was moving through water. "Mom," Lucas said, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "That is your trainer. That is the guy who comes to dinner. That is the guy you said was helping you through your trauma." Sylvia didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was paralyzed by the sudden crushing weight of reality. "Why is he wearing Dad's coat?" Lucas yelled. The sound distorted over the Zoom audio feed, but the pain was clear. "Why is he driving Dad's truck? You said Dad was stalking you. You said Dad was outside the window." "Lucas, please," Sylvia whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "It is not what it looks like." "It is exactly what it looks like," I said from my hospital bed. My voice was calm, cold, and sharp. I looked at the camera. I looked at the woman I had shared 30 years of my life with, the woman who had just tried to bury me. "He is not stalking you, Sylvia," I said. "He is performing for you, and you are the director." Sterling, the lawyer, finally snapped out of his shock. He slammed his laptop shut, trying to kill the feed, but it was too late. The evidence had been seen. The bell had been rung. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This deposition is over," Sterling shouted. "We are taking a recess. I need to speak to my client privately. We are done here." "Sit down, David," Rachel said. Her voice was icy. "We are not done. We are just getting started." Sterling looked at the camera, his face red with anger and panic. "You cannot ambush us like this," he sputtered. "This is highly irregular. I am filing a motion to suppress this video. I am filing a motion for a mistrial. You can file whatever you want," Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. "But you might want to advise your client to remain silent, because she is about to have a very different conversation with a very different kind of authority." Sterling froze. He looked at Rachel, then he looked at Sylvia. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean that perjury is a crime, David," Rachel said, checking her watch. "And so is insurance fraud. And so is extortion. And since Mr. Thorne is a vulnerable adult due to his medical condition, this also qualifies as elder abuse." She looked up at the screen. "And we didn't just invite you to a Zoom call. We invited some other interested parties to listen in." On the screen behind Sylvia, the heavy wooden doors of the conference room burst open. It happened so fast it looked like a scene from a movie. 3 uniformed police officers and 2 detectives in plain clothes marched into the room. The lead detective, a tall man with a grim face, held up a badge. "Sylvia Thorne," he announced, his voice booming over the microphone. Sylvia jumped in her seat, screaming a short, sharp sound of terror. She spun around in her chair. "You are under arrest," the detective said, walking straight toward her. "No," Sylvia shrieked. She scrambled backward, knocking her chair over. "No, wait. You do not understand. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and filing a false police report," the detective said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Sterling backed away from her. He held his hands up, distancing himself physically and legally from the radioactive disaster that was his client. "David, do something!" Sylvia screamed, reaching out to him. "David, tell them it is a mistake." "I cannot help you, Sylvia," Sterling said, his voice trembling. "I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately." The officer grabbed Sylvia's wrists. She fought him. The elegant, grieving victim vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. She kicked and thrashed, her hair flying wild around her face. "It wasn't me," she screamed. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a scapegoat, looking for anyone to blame. Her gaze landed on the screen, on the frozen image of Gavin at the gas station. It was him. She shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat. It was Gavin. "He made me do it." The officer clicked the cuffs onto her wrists. "He told me to say it," Sylvia yelled as they dragged her toward the door. She looked directly into the camera, directly at me. Her eyes were wide with madness. "Harrison, tell them. Gavin said we needed the money. He said you were dying anyway. He said you wouldn't miss it. He planned it all. I didn't know he was going to wear your clothes." I didn't know. I watched her. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound emptiness. She was still lying. Even now, even as the handcuffs bit into her skin, she was trying to rewrite the script to make herself the victim. "We have Gavin Reynolds in custody, Ms. Thorne," the detective said, pushing her forward. "He was picked up at the Ironclad gym 10 minutes ago, and he is very eager to talk about who paid for the truck." "No," Sylvia wailed. The sound echoed down the hallway as they dragged her out of the room. "No, no!" Lucas stood alone in the conference room. He was trembling. He looked at the empty doorway where his mother had just been taken away. Then he looked at the camera. He looked at me. His face was wet with tears. He looked like he was 5 years old again, lost in a supermarket. "Dad," he whispered. I wanted to reach through the screen. I wanted to hold him. "It is okay, Lucas," I said softly. "It is over." Sterling was packing his briefcase with frantic speed. He didn't look at Lucas. He didn't look at the camera. He just wanted to get out before the blast radius expanded to include him. I ended the call. The screen went black. The room in the hospital was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan cooling down. I sat there for a long time. My back throbbed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted. "We got them," Rachel said, closing her laptop. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. "It is a clean sweep, Harrison. Gavin will flip on her to get a plea deal. Sylvia is looking at 5 years minimum. Your assets are safe." I nodded. My assets were safe. My reputation was safe. But my family was gone. I looked at the blank wall where the video had been playing. I saw Gavin's face. I saw Sylvia's face. The greed, the malice. And then I saw Lucas's face. The betrayal. I reached for the remote control and lowered the bed. I needed to lie down. I needed to let the spinal stimulator do its work. "You did the right thing, Harrison," Rachel said, standing up and putting a hand on my shoulder. "You saved yourself." "I know," I whispered. But as I closed my eyes, I wondered if a bridge could ever truly be repaired after it had been burned to the ground. The legal war was over. But the reconstruction was just beginning. And I had a feeling that rebuilding a relationship with my son was going to be harder than any skyscraper I had ever designed. I took a deep breath. "One beam at a time," I told myself. Just lay one beam at a time. The aftermath of the deposition was like the silence after a hurricane. The winds had died down, but the landscape was changed forever. Sylvia and Gavin were arraigned 2 days later. The evidence was irrefutable. Between the biometric data from my spine and Gavin's confession to avoid a harsher sentence, the district attorney didn't even have to work hard. Sylvia was looking at 5 years for conspiracy and perjury. Gavin took a plea deal for 3 years. They turned on each other instantly in the interrogation room, blaming one another with a venom that made the police officers uncomfortable. It was a fitting end to their partnership. I was still in the hospital when Lucas came to see me. It was a Tuesday evening. The rain was lashing against the window just like it had on the night his mother claimed I was stalking her. But inside room 402, it was dry and quiet. Lucas didn't walk in with the arrogance he had shown a week ago. He walked in like a ghost. He stood at the foot of my bed, his hands twisting a baseball cap. He couldn't look me in the eye. He looked at the floor. He looked at the monitors. He looked anywhere but at the father he had called a monster. "Dad," he whispered. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. "I believed her," he said, his voice cracking. "She cried so much, Dad. She was shaking. I thought she was really scared. I just wanted to protect her." I know, I said. That is what makes it tragic, Lucas. You have a good heart, but you let her weaponize it. You let her take your love for her and turn it into a knife to stab me with. I am so sorry, he sobbed. Tears were running down his face now. I should have known. I should have asked you. Yes, you should have, I said. But you didn't. You chose a side. And now you have to live with the fact that you stood in a room and watched them try to destroy me. He fell silent. The weight of my words crushed him more than any shouting match could have. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted me to tell him it was okay, that we would go back to normal. But we couldn't. The bridge had snapped. We could build a new one maybe one day, but the old one was gone. I reached for the envelope on my bedside table. Here, I said, sliding it toward him. What is this? He asked, wiping his eyes. It is a check, I said. It covers your tuition for the rest of this year. I promised I would see you through college, and I keep my promises, even when people break theirs to me. He stared at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. Dad, I cannot take this. Take it, I ordered, because it is the last thing you are getting from me. After this year, you are on your own. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, Lucas. You need to learn how to see the world with your own eyes, not through your mother's tears or anyone else's agenda. He took the envelope. His hand was shaking. Will I see you again? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time. I need to heal, and so do you. Go make something of yourself, son. Make me proud. Not by defending me, but by being a man who cannot be fooled. He nodded. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. He looked back at me one last time. I love you, Dad, he whispered. I watched him walk out. I didn't say it back. Not because I didn't feel it, but because words were too easy. Actions were what mattered, and my action was letting him go so he could finally grow up. 6 months later, the air in the rehabilitation center smelled of rubber mats and sweat. It was a good smell, an honest smell. I stood between the parallel bars. My hands gripped the metal rails. The titanium screws in my back had fused perfectly with the bone. The structure was solid. Mr. Thorne, the physical therapist called out from across the room. Are you ready for the frame? I looked at the aluminum walker standing next to me, the cage I had lived in for half a year. No, I said. I am done with cages. I let go of the bars. For a second I wobbled. My legs felt heavy. The fear of falling was a cold spike in my gut. But then I remembered the graph. I remembered the flat line that proved I was still. Now I wanted to see a spike. I wanted to create movement. I took a step. My right foot planted firmly. Then the left. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast. But it was mine. I walked across the room, 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps. The other patients stopped to watch. The therapist clapped, but I didn't hear them. I only heard the rhythm of my own breathing and the steady beat of my heart. I was walking away from the hospital. I was walking away from Sylvia. I was walking away from the victim I used to be. I walked out the double doors and into the sunlight. Parked at the curb wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a medical transport van. It was a motorcycle. A brand new Indian Chief Dark Horse. Matte black chrome and leather. A beast of a machine. I had used the settlement money from the countersuit to buy it. Sylvia's assets had been liquidated to pay me for defamation and emotional distress. Every time I revved that engine, I would think of her not with anger, but with gratitude. She tried to take my pension. Instead, She bought me my freedom. I swung my leg over the seat. It took effort, but I did it. I put on my helmet. Not a newsboy cap. A helmet. I started the engine. The rumble vibrated through my spine. A good vibration. A vibration of life. I looked at the road ahead. It was open. It was empty. And it was mine. I wasn't Harrison Thorne, the victim in room 402 anymore. I was Harrison Thorne, the man who survived. I kicked the kickstand up and twisted the throttle. The bike surged forward. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. Only the road ahead. The lesson I learned is that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones holding the knife. Trust is a beautiful thing, but it must be earned, not given blindly. We often ignore the red flags because we are afraid of being alone, but standing alone is better than standing with people who want to see you fall. Your dignity and your truth are worth fighting for, even if you have to fight the ones you raised. If this story resonated with you and you believe that truth always wins, in the end, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs the courage to cut toxic ties. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand alone to defend your truth? I will see you in the next story. Stay strong.